So one of those guys that we believe had a big impact on his particular town or borough in this case, and surely just New York culture and New York hustler history. A guy we came across is a guy by the name of George Rivera, AKA Boy George.
Once upon a time, there was a young guy named Boy George Rivera. He wasn't just any ordinary teenager. By the time he hit 18, he had built something big, but not something to be proud of. He was in charge of a national drug ring. Yep, you heard it right, a drug ring. But how did he get there?
Yeah. So this guy though, George Rivera, who became known as Boy George, he was out of the Bronx, grew up in the Bronx. But this gentleman, George Rivera, just another product of his environment, but had a real entrepreneurial streak in him.
Well, it's a wild ride. Picture a kid from the streets, hustling and dealing drugs. He had a knack for it, they say. He started small, just selling to friends or people he knew. But then, things got out of control. His operation grew, spreading its roots across the country. Soon, he was like a big shot in the underworld, making big bucks and calling the shots. It's like something out of a movie, but this was real life for Boy George Rivera. It was a life of unimaginable affluence, except it was filled with so much danger.
Now, the tragedy of his story, and we'll reiterate that again, he only had a 2-year run, man. But in that 2 years, he made an impact. So
at the end of the 80s, while America concerned itself with the consequences of crack and crack dealers, Boy George was running 5 heroin locations in the South Bronx, including 139th and Brook, one of the oldest and more profitable heroin venues in the borough. According to federal prosecutors, by the time he turned 18, Boy George was a dealer of the major league. In late 1988, when he was 20 years old, Boy George was the primary source of heroin in the South Bronx, employing more than 50 workers and grossing about $250,000 a week, while other kids his age were still worrying about what clothes to wear or what girls to date. The brand name of this teenager's heroin was Obsession. The logo on its little bags was a red king's crown. The press called him the Puerto Rican James Bond due to his fleet of cars and all the gadgets he accessorized them with. Now, you might be wondering, how on earth did he do that? Well, that's the wild part. George had this incredible ability to charm people. He knew how to talk his way into anything, and he used that charm to convince others to join his operation. He wasn't from a rich family or a fancy neighborhood. He was just a regular kid who found himself in the middle of something huge. People were shocked to hear about a young boy running such a big drug ring. How did he do it? What led him down that path? But hold on, this isn't your typical success story. It's about choices, consequences, and the power of determination. Sure, he was making money, but at what cost? Lives ruined, families torn apart, and the law hot on his heels. Boy George Rivera's life wasn't a fairy tale. It was a dangerous game with high stakes. As you can imagine, things didn't stay smooth forever. The law caught up with him, and George's empire came crashing down. It's a story of twists and turns, of danger and daring. And believe it or not, it's all true.
He's done 30 plus years now.
So buckle up and get ready for an unbelievable ride. This is the story of how a regular kid from nowhere became a big shot in the world of crime, all before he could legally buy a beer. So let's briefly talk about the Boy George Rivera's upbringing in the Bronx and the establishment of his drug empire, how he gained control and dominance in the drug market. Boy George Rivera grew up in the Bronx, a borough of New York City. He was raised in a neighborhood where poverty and crime were common. Rivera's family background was tough. His parents struggled to make ends meet, often working multiple jobs to provide for their children. Despite their best efforts, the family faced financial hardships, which influenced Rivera's early life. Rivera's upbringing was marked by influences from his surroundings. He was exposed to the realities of street life from a young age, witnessing the struggles and temptations that came with it. The environment he grew up in shaped his worldview and influenced the choices he made. Early on, signs of Rivera's involvement in criminal activities began to emerge. He was drawn to the allure of easy money and the excitement of the streets. Rivera found himself entangled in petty crimes, such as theft and vandalism, as a way to survive and escape the challenges of his environment. Boy George rose to power through his involvement in the drug trade, starting with his initial forays into the illegal business. At first, he operated on a small scale, learning the ins and outs of the trade and building connections with other players in the market. He quickly realized the potential for profit and expansion in the drug business. "I have to be in a place where I can manipulate the market. That's my goal," he says. "That's what I am, a manipulator." As Rivera's knowledge and influence grew, he established his drug empire by strategically expanding his operations. He utilized a combination of tactics to gain control and dominance in the drug market. One of his key strategies was to form alliances with other drug Ts, enabling him to access a wider distribution network and secure his position in the market. Rivera also employed intimidation tactics, using violence and coercion to eliminate competition and maintain his stronghold. He ruthlessly dealt with anyone who posed a threat to his business interests, sending a clear message that he was not to be challenged. Boy George carved out an empire and flooded the streets of Manhattan and the South Bronx with a brand of high-quality heroin with the brand names Obsession and Sledgehammer. He was ruthless and powerful, federal authorities said, and they linked him to a dozen homicides that marked his climb to the top. The 20-year-old CEO allegedly ran a $9 million a year heroin ring. Boy George was making crazy money, Sports says. Everybody knows that. He was known for having a temper and had been involved in several shootouts to cement his reputation in the streets, yet he never missed an opportunity to intimidate. Boy George didn't F around when it came time to get paid either. Don't fall for tricks about, "Oh, I'll see you tomorrow, blah, blah," when you are dealing with someone who owes me money. You say, "Listen, homie, I want to eat today, so I'm not going to wait until tomorrow to eat. I want to eat today. I'm hungry. Pay up, dude." "That's it," he said. Through his cunning tactics and ruthless determination, Boy George Rivera solidified his position as a major player in the drug trade, ultimately becoming a dominant force in the underworld. "You can't read about it in books, and you can't look at it in the movies," he says, explaining his ambition. "I was born with something inside of me. We don't know exactly how long you'll have it, or how wide a span it'll get, but you could get it, and all you gotta do is just put your mind to it. Don't think of nothing else. And ask about it. Think about it. Think with it. Act like if you were it and change the shoes around like it was you. And then you'll see." Says George, Rivera also utilizes multiple safe houses and stash locations to store drugs, ensuring that even if one location is compromised, he won't lose his entire inventory. Outside the building, 4 lookouts walk. Others perch on nearby fire escapes while 2 runners steer the streets. The thick metal door to a first-floor apartment, 1C, is framed with cement, sending a familiar message to the people who occupy the building. You don't pause here unless you want some. At your service, right down to the food. There can be no skimming of the product because there is no conversation, because there are no phones. It is very organized. The lookout signal to the dealer, a raised baseball hat, a touch to the face, and the dealer hits the appropriate switch, translating his instructions into color. The pitcher responds to light drop after drop, only knowing how much heroin to deliver. The steerer just knows how much he takes in, the exact amount to be offered up. If I look out the window and I could see a cop, I give it the yellow switch. You see it, and you slow down. If there is no movement in the upstairs apartment, no signals coming, you know something's up and you bum rush. Bum rush. If I hit the red switch, pack everything up, get in the dumbwaiter, and go. Green's green, dude. The material come down and the money go up. That's all you need to know. Ready? Breakfast or lunch or dinner. Send a runner for a hero and one of those big Cokes. Boy George explains from the Metropolitan Correctional Center. The organization maintained a cutting mill, or table, at which pure heroin was diluted and packaged in $10 glassine envelopes stamped with a brand name. The location of the mill varied from time to time. After packaging, the heroin was delivered to distribution locations. There were 5 principal distribution outlets, called spots or stores. 1, 166th Street and Washington Avenue in the Bronx. 2, Avenue St. John and Southern Boulevard in the Bronx. 3, 139th Street and Brook Avenue in the Bronx. 4, 122nd Street and 2nd Avenue in Manhattan. And 5, 156th Street and Cortlandt Avenue in the Bronx. The spots were run by spot owners who employed a variety of street managers, sellers, steerers, lookouts, and other assistants. The spot owners kept a percentage of the proceeds of the heroin sales, from which they paid their employees and remitted the remainder to Rivera. Boy George ran other brands named Candyland, Delirious, and Sledgehammer, leased a pool of 10 luxury cars from OJ's car service in Queens. The drivers, all men, could be paid up to $100 an hour to remain on call. It was at OJ's that Boy George met Ward Johnson, an older Jamaican hustler better known as 6-0. 6-0 became Boy George's first lieutenant. Boy George would buy units of heroin, usually about 700 grams, from his Chinese suppliers, whom he privately referred to as fried rice, and pass them along to 6-0, who would store them and distribute them to the cutting mills. One former mill worker, now serving 11 years with no parole for conspiracy, said they sometimes snorted coke to stay awake through the long shifts. 6-0 kept very good records. Location managers generally made 10 to 20% of the profit, depending upon the location, and were responsible for paying the lookouts, steerers, pitchers, and runners out of their share. Weasel and Ralphie, who also became a cooperating witness, earned $2,500 a week. 6-0 made $12,000. Women filled the lower ranks of the operation. For 12, 15, sometimes 20-hour shifts, they usually received $100. Boy George made roughly $45,000 a week. During the summer of 1987, the organization distributed about $100,000 worth of heroin a week. The police had learned of the Rivera operation from a confidential informant. Then the police went for a burglary scare. After a burglary scare, Rivera abandoned his East 203rd Street apartment and moved the cutting mill to the Manhattan Marriott Marquis. Police officers who were looking for Rivera in an unrelated investigation located the abandoned 203rd Street apartment, where they found glassine envelopes, heroin-cutting paraphernalia, a Bowie knife, a bulletproof vest, a shotgun, and a variety of ammunition. When he learned of the seizure, Rivera switched the heroin brand name to Delirious, but soon returned to Obsession because his customers had developed a loyalty to that name. At 21, he owned shopping malls and commercial real estate. He flaunted a lifestyle as lavish as a New York socialite or those portrayed on lifestyles of the rich and famous. Rivera used some of the proceeds of the operation to purchase a house in Puerto Rico for $145,000 in cash. He extensively remodeled the house, including the installation of an outdoor pool with the words Obsession and the initials BG for Boy George tiled in the bottom. He also purchased a number of customized luxury cars, source says. And the one thing Boy George was known for, besides being calculating and violent, was his cars. The first Esh was Benz, the 190 kitted up, music blaring, and Boy George was on some white boy Esh too. He liked rock and roll, jamming to Guns N' Roses in the hood. The first time I saw his shy was over there on Brook Avenue. On a drive-by, too. He was just passing by. Everybody knew him off the rip. George didn't play when it came to cars. He bought Ferraris, Lamborghinis, and a Bentley. All this only added to his legend. He pulled up in a Lincoln Town car to show us. He had the Porsche pressing buttons showing how the license plate moved and the lights changed. Several of his cars were straight out of a James Bond flick with all types of features to assist in escaping in car chases. The biggest influences in his life were probably Gleason's Gym and James Bond, Sport says. So here's how it all went down. Rivera threw a black tie party for his entire organization aboard a chartered yacht. Rivera paid for the tuxedo rentals, dinner, open bar, and entertainment, including a raffle with luxury prizes. The partygoers were seated at tables organized by spot location. At trial, the government introduced in evidence a photo album seized from Rivera's apartment that contained pictures of the occasion. At the party, Rivera gave $50,000 in cash and a Rolex watch to Johnson, a customized BMW automobile to Cook, and solid gold belt buckles with the recipient's name inscribed in diamonds to a number of the spot owners and managers. The government introduced some of the belt buckles into evidence at trial. A buckle for Cruz was not introduced into evidence, and there were no pictures of Cruz receiving a buckle. On April 4, 1989, the New York police obtained authorization to wiretap Rivera's home phone at 1665 Morris Avenue in the Bronx. The tap remained for 27 days, and 58 recorded conversations were introduced into evidence. These conversations provided a detailed picture of the ongoing heroin conspiracy and Rivera's control over it. At approximately 2:30 a.m. on May 1, 1989, the police executed a search warrant on the Mill apartment. 11 workers were arrested, and the officers seized approximately 1.1 kilograms of heroin, 5 loaded weapons, over 100,000 empty glassine envelopes bearing the Obsession or Sledgehammer logo, dozens of blocks of cutting agent, a triple beam scale, 4 grinding machines, other processing materials, and a spiral notebook containing 1989 production records for the organization's mills. Rivera was arrested outside his apartment building the next morning. He was carrying $7,500 in cash. I was on foot when I was arrested. If I could have gotten to my car, they'd still be chasing me, Boy George said. James Bond, one of George's heroes, inspired 50 grand worth of special features added to the 190 Mercedes he had. A warrant was then obtained, and Rivera's apartment was searched. Police found there $1,000 in cash, a life-size crown similar to that depicted in the Obsession logo, address books with telephone numbers of his employees, ammunition, payroll records, drug transaction records, and raffle tickets from the Christmas party. In court, Rivera faced multiple charges, including drug T, possession of illegal firearms, attempted income tax evasion, and conspiracy to distribute controlled substances. Prosecutors presented substantial evidence linking Rivera to the illegal activities. After a lengthy trial, Rivera was found guilty on all charges. The judge sentenced him to a life imprisonment, to be followed by a 5-year term of supervised release for his convictions of conspiracy to distribute heroin and attempted income tax evasion. Appeals from an order of the United States District Court for the Southern District of New York. The consequences of Rivera's criminal activities were severe. Not only did he face imprisonment, but his actions also had a detrimental impact on the community. Drug T contributes to addiction, violence, and other social problems. Boy George Rivera's actions caused problems that lasted a really long time. People in the Bronx had to deal with the consequences of what he did for many years. For the Bronx community, Rivera's actions resulted in increased crime rates, heightened fear, and disrupted social cohesion. Families were torn apart, and many residents lived in constant fear of violence and retaliation. The scars of Rivera's criminal enterprise are still felt today, with many struggling to rebuild their lives and communities in the aftermath. His actions also affected the young people who looked up to him. Some of them thought it was cool to be like many young people who looked up to Rivera as a role model, idolizing his wealth and power without fully understanding the devastating consequences of his actions. This made the problem even worse, because it kept going on even after Boy George was caught. But from Boy George's case, we can learn some important lessons. we can see that it's not just about catching the bad guys, but also about stopping other people from wanting to be like them. This means we need to work on making sure young people have better role models and opportunities so they don't feel like they have to turn to crime. By learning from Rivera's mistakes and successes, authorities have been able to develop more effective strategies for dismantling organized crime networks and preventing future tragedies. Additionally, Rivera's eventual arrest and prosecution demonstrate that no criminal is above the law, sending a powerful message to would-be offenders.